The daily life of a World War II soldier. Picture this. You're jolted awake at 4:30 in the morning, not by an alarm clock, but by the thunderous roar of artillery fire that shakes the very ground beneath your makeshift bed. You're 22 years old, and just 6 months ago you were working at your father's hardware store in Kansas, worried about whether Sally Henderson would say yes to the spring dance. Now, you're Private James Mitchell of the 29th Infantry Division, and the biggest question on your mind is whether you'll make it through another day alive. This is the story of what life was really like for the millions of young men who found themselves thrust into the largest conflict humanity has ever seen known, where the mundane and the terrifying lived side by side in the mud-caked trenches and war-torn villages of Europe and the Pacific. Let me take you back to a typical day, if you could ever call anything about war typical, in the life of an American infantryman somewhere in France, just after D-Day in the summer of 1944. The war has been raging for 5 years now, though for James, it feels like he's aged a lifetime in the 6 months since he shipped out from New York Harbor, waving goodbye to his mother and kid sister, their faces growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely into the crowd of thousands of other weeping families. The day always begins before dawn, and not because anyone sets an alarm. When you're sleeping in a foxhole that you've dug yourself, maybe 4 feet deep and barely wide enough to turn over in, covered with a poncho that does almost nothing to keep out the cold rain that seems to fall constantly in Normandy. Sleep is a precious commodity that never lasts long enough. James has learned to sleep through almost anything. The constant rumble of artillery in the distance, the periodic rat-a-tat of machine gun fire, even the occasional whistle of a shell passing overhead. These have all become as familiar as the sound of his mother's radio back home playing Glenn Miller on Sunday evenings. But what always wakes him is the cold. God, the cold. Even in summer, the pre-dawn hours bring a dampness that seeps into your bones, through every layer of your wool uniform, through the blanket you've wrapped around yourself, right down into your marrow. James opens his eyes to find his foxhole mate, Eddie Kowalski from Brooklyn, already awake, sitting up with his back against the muddy wall, smoking a cigarette. Eddie is one of those guys who seems to have an endless supply of smokes, trading everything from candy bars to captured German insignia to keep his habit fed. The orange glow of the cigarette tip is the only light in the pre-dawn darkness, and James watches the smoke curl upward, momentarily mesmerized by its gentle motion, such a stark contrast to everything else in this place. "Morning, sunshine," Eddie mutters, his Brooklyn accent thick even in whisper. They've learned to keep their voices down in the morning. Sound carries differently in the early hours, and you never know who might be listening from the German positions just a few hundred yards away. "Coffee's gonna be piss water again today, guaranteed." James nods, rubbing his face with hands that are perpetually dirty, no matter how many times he tries to wash them. The dirt here isn't like dirt back home. It's a special kind of filth, mixed with cordite, mud, oil, and God knows what else, and it has a way of working itself into every crack and crevice of your body. His fingernails have been black for so long he can barely remember what clean hands look like. He runs his tongue over his teeth, feeling the film that's built up there. They get to brush their teeth maybe once a week if they're lucky, and even then, it's with powder that tastes like chalk and water from their canteens that always carries a metallic tang from the purification tablets. The first order of business, every single morning without fail, is checking your rifle. James reaches for his M1 Garand, the 8-pound piece of wood and metal that has become more familiar to him than his own family at this point. In basic training at Fort Benning, the drill sergeants had made them sleep with their rifles, eat with their rifles, even go to the bathroom with their rifles slung over their shoulders. "This rifle is your best friend, your wife, your lifeline," Sergeant McCarthy had screamed in their faces day after day. "You will know this weapon better than you know your own mother. It will keep you alive, but only if you keep it clean." At the time, James had thought it was just typical military nonsense, the kind of dramatic exaggeration designed to break them down and build them back up as soldiers. Now, he understands. His rifle has saved his life more times than he can count, and he's seen men die because their weapons jammed at the critical moment. He breaks down the garand with practiced efficiency, even in the dim light, checking each component for dirt, moisture, or damage. The bolt slides smooth. Good. The firing pin looks clean. The barrel could use another wipe, but it'll do. He runs an oiled cloth through it anyway, then reassembles the weapon. The metallic clicks and snaps as familiar as a beloved song. 8 rounds in the unblocked clip, slid into the internal magazine with that distinctive ping as it locks into place. Safety on for now. The whole process takes maybe 3 minutes, but it's 3 minutes that might mean the difference between life and death later. By now, the first hints of gray light are starting to seep into the sky, and James can begin to make out the shapes of other foxholes around them, each one containing 2 or 3 men in various states of wakefulness. Their position is in what used to be an apple orchard, though most of the trees are now shattered stumps, victims of the artillery bombardments that preceded the American advance through this sector. A few trees still stand, their branches twisted and broken, apples rotting on the ground because no one dares to stand up long enough to pick them, even though the fruit represents the first fresh food they've seen in weeks. The call comes down the line, passed from foxhole to foxhole in harsh whispers. Formation in 10. Pass it on. James nudges Eddie, who's dozed off again despite finishing his cigarette, and they begin the process of getting ready for the day. This means putting on the gear that they'd removed during the night to use as pillows or extra cushioning against the cold, hard ground. The M1923 cartridge belt goes around the waist first, heavy with ammunition pouches, canteen, first aid pouch, and bayonet. Then the haversack on the back, containing whatever personal items they've managed to hold on to, letters from home, a spare pair of socks if you're lucky enough to have one, maybe a chocolate bar saved from the last ration distribution, a Testament Bible that the chaplain handed out before they shipped overseas, the entrenching tool, that short-handled shovel that has become their best friend, hangs from the belt on one side, steel helmet on the head, heavy and uncomfortable but absolutely essential. James has seen what happens to men who take their helmets off at the wrong moment, and the images haunt his dreams. They climb out of their foxhole as the sky continues to lighten, joining the rest of their squad as they form up in a rough line behind a hedgerow that provides some concealment from German observation posts. Their squad leader, Sergeant Tom Wilson from Tennessee, looks them over with eyes that have seen too much. Wilson is 26 years old, ancient by infantry standards, and he's been with the division since North Africa. He's the kind of NCO that the men would follow into hell itself, not because he's particularly inspiring or charismatic, but because he knows how to keep them alive. He doesn't waste words, doesn't make grand speeches, just gives clear orders and leads by example. "Morning, ladies," Wilson says, his southern drawl somehow making even that sound both sarcastic and affectionate. "Intel says Jerry might be planning something today. Stay alert, stay low, and for God's sake, don't bunch up. Mitchell, Kowalski, you're on patrol later. Details after chow." The mention of food makes James's stomach growl audibly. They haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and even that had been just a can of cold beans and a hard cracker that could break teeth. But first, there's the morning stand-to, a tradition carried over from the trenches of World War I. For an hour after dawn and an hour before dusk, every man stands ready at his position, weapons loaded, eyes scanning the terrain ahead, because those are the times when attacks are most likely to come. It's usually uneventful, just cold and boring, but it only takes one surprise attack to understand why they do it every single day without fail. James stands at the edge of the foxhole, M1 Garand at the ready, and watches the French countryside slowly emerge from the shadows. In another life, this would be beautiful country. Rolling hills, small villages with stone churches, carefully tended farms that have been worked by the same families for generations. But war has transformed it into something alien and threatening. Every hedgerow could hide a German machine gun nest. Every farmhouse might be an artillery observation post. Every copse of trees could shelter a mortar team. The locals, those few who haven't fled, watch the Americans with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. Sure, they're being liberated, But liberation means their homes are being turned into battlefields, their livestock killed by shell fire, their fields torn up by tank treads. The stand too passes without incident, and Sergeant Wilson gives the all clear. The men relax slightly, though everyone keeps their weapons close. In the distance, they can hear the rumble of tanks, probably American Shermans moving up to support another unit's advance. The sound is oddly comforting. As much as the infantry likes to complain about the tankers, having armor support nearby means someone else is drawing fire, at least for a while. Now comes breakfast, and James has learned that breakfast is an optimistic term for what they actually receive. A detail of men has been back at the company kitchen, such as it is, heating up rations in large metal containers. The kitchen is usually set up a mile or so behind the front lines, far enough back to be relatively safe from direct fire, but close enough to get hot food to the troops before it goes completely cold. The food comes up in insulated containers carried by jeeps or, when the roads are too torn up, by men on foot. Today's breakfast is powdered eggs, reconstituted into a yellow substance that bears only a passing resemblance to actual eggs, a slice of Spam that's been fried in a pan that probably hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks, and coffee that Eddie had correctly predicted would taste like battery acid mixed with mud. There's also a slice of bread, actual bread from the battalion bakery, which is the highlight of the meal. James wolfs it all down anyway, using his mess kit that he'd cleaned last night with sand and a little water from his canteen. Hot food is hot food, and he learned months ago not to be picky. Besides, he needs the calories. Infantry work is exhausting in ways that civilians can't imagine. Just walking in full gear across rough terrain is workout enough, but add in digging foxholes, carrying ammunition, running under fire, and the constant stress of combat, and a man can burn through thousands of calories a day. While they eat, Sergeant Wilson briefs James and Eddie on their patrol assignment. They're to move forward about half a mile, toward the German lines, and gather intelligence on enemy positions and movements. It's called a reconnaissance patrol, and it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the infantry. You're deliberately walking toward the enemy, trying to get close enough to see what they're doing without being seen yourself. James has been on maybe a dozen patrols since landing in France, and each one has shaved a few more years off his life from pure stress. "Take Jenkins with you," Wilson adds, nodding toward a kid who looks about 19 but is probably younger. Jenkins is a replacement, arrived just a week ago to fill a slot left vacant when Turner caught a piece of shrapnel in the neck and bled out before the medic could reach him. Jenkins still has that wide-eyed look, still flinches at every loud noise, still thinks that courage and righteousness will somehow shield him from bullets. James and Eddie know better. They've seen too many good men, brave men, die for no better reason than being in the wrong place at the wrong second. They spend an hour preparing for the patrol, checking and rechecking their equipment. James makes sure his canteen is full and that he has at least 60 rounds of ammunition and clips, plus a couple of grenades hooked to his belt. Eddie carries a Tommy gun, the Thompson submachine gun that's prized for close quarters work, along with several magazines of .45 caliber ammunition. They blacken their faces with burnt cork to reduce shine, though they're already so dirty it hardly seems necessary. Jenkins watches and imitates, trying to look confident and failing miserably. "Stay behind me, kid," Eddie tells him, not unkindly. "Don't make noise. Don't shoot unless we shoot first, and if things go sideways, you run like hell back to our lines. Got it?" Jenkins nods, swallowing hard. James remembers being that scared, though it feels like a lifetime ago now. Back during his first combat action, moving through a village somewhere in Normandy, he'd been so terrified that he'd nearly frozen up completely. It was only Eddie, cursing at him in that Brooklyn accent, that had snapped him out of it. Now, 6 months later, he's not sure if he's braver or just numb. Maybe there's no difference. They move out at 900 hours, military time being one of the many things that's become second nature. The three of them slip through a gap in the hedgerow and begin making their way across the open ground beyond. This is when training becomes instinct. They move in a staggered formation, never in a straight line, using every bit of cover and concealment available, from crater to hedgerow, From fallen tree to abandoned farm equipment, they advance in short rushes, one man moving while the others cover. It's slow, exhausting work that requires constant vigilance. The French countryside, James has learned, is a nightmare for infantry operations. These hedgerows, the bocage as the locals call them, are centuries old, grown up so thick and dense that you can barely see 10 feet in any direction. Each field is like its own little fortress, surrounded by these natural walls of earth and vegetation that are sometimes 6 feet thick at the base. The Germans, being excellent soldiers, whatever else you might say about them, have turned each hedgerow into a defensive position, covering all the gaps with machine guns and mortars. Advancing through this country means taking one field at a time, never knowing what's waiting in the next one. There may be 20 minutes into the patrol, having covered perhaps 300 yards, when James hears it. The metallic click that makes every infantryman's blood run cold. Someone has stepped on a mine. For a single heartbeat, everything freezes. Then James's training kicks in. "Don't move," he hisses. "Nobody move." The three of them are spread out about 10 yards apart, and James can see Jenkins standing rigid as a statue, his face gone white even under the dirt. Eddie is off to the left, and he's frozen mid-step, one foot still in the air. James's mind races. German mines in this sector are usually shoe mines, small wooden boxes filled with explosives and designed specifically to maim rather than kill. Step on one, and it'll blow your foot clean off, turning you from a soldier into a casualty who requires 2 other men to carry you back, effectively removing 3 men from the battle instead of 1. Diabolically clever, really. "Who stepped on it?" James whispers, though he's pretty sure he knows. Eddie's too experienced to make that mistake, which means it's either him or Jenkins. "Please, God, let it be me," he thinks, "because at least I know what to do." "Me?" Jenkins squeaks, confirming James's fears. "Oh God, it's me." I felt it click. What do I do? What do I do? James forces himself to stay calm, even though his heart is hammering so hard he can feel it in his throat. "Listen to me very carefully, Jenkins. You're going to be fine. Mines like this have a pressure trigger. As long as you keep your weight on it, it won't detonate. Do you understand?" Jenkins nods jerkily, and James can see tears starting to track through the dirt on the kid's face. He's maybe 18 years old, probably lied about his age to enlist, and now he's standing on a device designed to tear him apart. James has seen mine casualties before. They're not pretty. Men screaming for their mothers, blood everywhere, the sickly sweet smell of torn flesh. He pushes the images away and focuses on the problem. "Eddie, get over here," James says quietly. Eddie moves with exaggerated care, testing each step before putting his weight down. Together they approach Jenkins from opposite sides. "Okay, kid, here's what's going to happen," James says, keeping his voice steady and authoritative. "On my count, you're going to jump backward as hard and as far as you can. Eddie and I are going to be ready to grab you and drag you to cover. The mine will detonate maybe a second after you leave it, so you need to jump far and fast. You understand?" "I can't," Jenkins moans. "I can't do it. I'm going to die." "You're not going to die, but you need to move," Eddie snaps. "We've all got about 30 seconds before a German patrol hears us out here and comes to investigate. Now shut up and get ready to jump." James positions himself behind Jenkins, ready to grab the kid's webbing and pull. Eddie does the same from the other side. James takes a deep breath, aware that this is either going to work or all 3 of them are going to catch shrapnel. "On 3, he says. 1, 2, 3. Jenkins jumps backward with a strength born of pure terror. James and Eddie grab him simultaneously, and all 3 go down in a heap, just as the mine detonates with a sharp crack and a fountain of dirt. They feel the pressure wave wash over them, feel debris pattering down on their helmets and backs. But when James does a quick check, everyone still has all their limbs attached. "Move, move, move," Eddie hisses, and they scramble toward the nearest cover, a depression in the ground that might have once been part of an irrigation ditch. They throw themselves into it, weapons at the ready, waiting to see if the explosion has drawn attention. Jenkins is shaking so badly his teeth are chattering, but he's alive and intact, and that's what matters. They wait there for 10 minutes, listening hard for any sound of enemy movement. When nothing comes, James makes the decision to abort the patrol and head back. They've gathered no intelligence about German positions, but they've learned something more valuable. That this entire area is probably mined information that could save dozens of lives when the company advances. They make their way back carefully, taking a slightly different route and testing each step. When they finally slip back through the lines, Sergeant Wilson takes one look at their faces and knows something happened. They give him a quick debrief, and he nods approvingly. "Good work getting the kid back. I'll pass the word about the mines. Go get some water and check your gear." The rest of the morning passes in a blur of routine activities. There's always work to do in infantry life. Ammunition has to be distributed and inventoried. Weapons need constant cleaning and maintenance. Foxholes require deepening and improving, sandbags to be filled and positioned, fields of fire to be cleared. James spends an hour with Eddie improving their fighting position, digging it deeper and building up the walls with sandbags they've scrounged from an abandoned German position. It's backbreaking work, and the French sun, now high in the sky, beats down mercilessly. Lunch comes around noon, delivered the same way breakfast was. Today it's beef stew from a can, heated up until it's at least lukewarm, more bread, and a canteen cup of that terrible coffee. James eats sitting on the edge of his foxhole, watching the sky. It's a beautiful day, clear and blue, which means the Allied air forces will be active. Sure enough, he spots the contrails of high-flying bombers, probably heading toward targets in Germany itself. It's somehow comforting to know that the war is being fought on multiple levels, that while he's down here in the mud worrying about mines and machine guns, there are men up there at 20,000 feet dropping tons of explosives on German industry and infrastructure. After lunch, there's a mail call, and this might be the most important event of any day for an infantryman. Letters from home are a lifeline to sanity, a reminder that there's a world beyond this one of mud and death and fear. The company mail clerk, a thin kid from Ohio whose job is somehow to get letters from America all the way to foxholes in France, works his way down the line calling out names. James gets 3 letters, one from his mother, written in her careful handwriting and full of news about neighbors and church socials that seems to come from another planet, one from his kid sister, shorter and full of gossip about school and boys, and one from Sally Henderson, and his heart does a little flip when he sees the return address. He saves Sally's letter for last, reading the other 2 first, while Eddie smokes another cigarette and pretends not to watch. His mother writes about the victory garden she's keeping, about the scrap metal drives and war bond rallies, about how proud she is of him. His sister's letter is lighter, full of complaints about rationing and excitement about some movie she saw. Both of them end with the same plea: stay safe, come home soon. If only it were that simple. Sally's letter is different. They've been writing back and forth since basic training, and something has developed between them through these letters. Something that might be love or might just be the desperate need to hold on to something normal and good in this insane world. She writes about working at the aircraft factory, about the other women there, about how everyone is doing their part. She tells him about saving her money for after the war, about the house she dreams of, about the life they might have together. She ends with, "Yours always." And James reads those 2 words maybe a dozen times, trying to imagine a future where such things are possible. He's writing a response, using a pencil and paper that he keeps in a waterproof pouch when the shelling starts. It begins with that distinctive whistling sound, like an express train passing overhead, and then the whole world explodes. German artillery, probably 88mm guns from several miles away, starts walking across their position. James and Eddie dive into their foxhole as the first shells land 50 yards away, throwing up geysers of dirt and shrapnel. The ground shakes with each impact, and the noise is beyond description. It's not just sound. It's a physical force that hammers at your eardrums and makes your internal organs vibrate. James curls into a ball at the bottom of the foxhole, hands over his head, helmet pulled down as far as it'll go, and prays. This is the worst part of war, worse even than being shot at, because at least when someone's shooting at you, you can shoot back. Artillery is impersonal and random. You can do everything right, be the best soldier in the world, and still catch a shell that lands in your foxhole and erases you from existence. James has seen it happen. One minute a guy is there, complaining about the food or showing around a picture of his girl, and the next, there's just a smoking crater and maybe a boot with a foot still in it. The barrage lasts maybe 10 minutes, though it feels like hours. When it finally stops, the silence is almost as shocking as the noise had been. James's ears are ringing so badly he can barely hear Eddie shouting at him to check for casualties. They climb out of their foxhole, legs shaky, and do a quick count. Their squad got lucky. Everyone's still alive, though Jackson has a piece of shrapnel in his arm that the medic will need to look at. 2 foxholes over, though, it's a different story. A shell made a direct hit, and there's nothing left of the 2 men who'd been sheltering there except a crater and some scattered equipment. James knew them, had shared cigarettes with them just this morning, and now they're gone, reduced to dog tags and a letter that some officer will have to write to their families. There's no time to process it, no time to grieve. The dead are covered with ponchos, and their personal effects are collected to be sent home. Life goes on for the living. Sergeant Wilson organizes a detail to fill in the crater and redistribute the squad's remaining men to make sure all positions are still covered. It's brutal and businesslike because it has to be. Mourn later, survive now. The afternoon drags on in a haze of heat and boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror. There's intermittent sniper fire from the German lines, and everyone learns to move in short, unpredictable bursts. James watches a bird, a small brown thing that he can't identify, land on a broken tree branch and sing its heart out, seemingly oblivious to the war raging around it. He envies that bird with an intensity that surprises him. Dinner comes as the sun starts to sink toward the horizon, and it's more of the same. Canned rations heated up and served with that god-awful coffee. James has learned to eat mechanically, shoveling food into his mouth without really tasting it, treating it as fuel rather than a meal. He's lost probably 20 pounds since landing in France, despite eating everything he can get his hands on. The constant stress and physical exertion burn through calories faster than the army can supply them. As dusk approaches, they go through evening stand-to, another hour of high alertness watching for attacks. The setting sun turns the sky brilliant shades of orange and red, and James can't help but think about the old saying, "Red sky at night, sailor's delight." His grandfather, who'd worked on fishing boats before retiring, used to say that. It seems like wisdom from another world, a peaceful world where the biggest worry was weather and catch sizes, not whether you'd wake up tomorrow morning. After stand-to, as darkness settles over the battlefield like a blanket, James and Eddie settle into their foxhole for the night. They've developed a routine. 2 hours on watch, 2 hours sleeping, alternating through the night. The man on watch sits with his weapon ready, listening more than watching in the darkness, alert for any sound that doesn't belong. The man sleeping curls up as best he can in the cramped space and tries to grab whatever rest is possible. It's Eddie's turn to take first watch, so James wraps himself in his blanket and tries to get comfortable on the hard ground. He's exhausted, bone-tired in a way that goes beyond physical weariness. It's the kind of tired that comes from being keyed up and alert for hours on end, from constant fear, from seeing friends die and knowing you might be next. But sleep doesn't come easily, despite his exhaustion. His mind won't shut off, replaying the day's events, the mine, the shelling, those 2 men erased from existence. Sally's letter, still in his pocket, pressing against his chest like a talisman. Somewhere in the darkness, someone is crying, trying to muffle the sound but not quite succeeding. James pretends not to hear. Everyone cries out here eventually. The ones who claim they don't are either lying or have been ground down into something that isn't quite human anymore. He's cried himself, usually in those pre-dawn hours when the darkness feels absolute and the weight of everything becomes too much to bear. Eddie has never mentioned it, and James has returned the favor when he's heard Eddie's suppressed sobs during his watch shifts. He must eventually drift off, because he's startled awake by Eddie shaking his shoulder. "Your turn," Eddie whispers, and they trade places without further conversation. James sits up, M1 Garand across his lap, and stares out into the darkness. His eyes adjust slowly, and he can make out the vague shapes of the hedgerow ahead, the darker patches that mark shell craters, the occasional movement that's probably just wind-stirring vegetation but might be something more sinister. The night sounds of a battlefield are different from daytime sounds. There's sporadic firing in the distance, the occasional flare arching up into the sky and casting everything in harsh, moving shadows before guttering out. Somewhere a machine gun rattles off a burst, answered by another. It's like a conversation in a language of death and violence. Closer, James can hear more mundane sounds. Someone coughing, trying to muffle it. The rustle of men shifting in their holes. A low murmur of voices from the next position over. Probably two guys who can't sleep passing the time in whispered conversation. James thinks about home, as he does every night. He tries to remember what his mother's kitchen smells like, the specific scent of her apple pie baking. He tries to remember the feeling of clean sheets on a real bed, the luxury of a hot shower, the simple pleasure of walking down a street without worrying about snipers or artillery. These memories are already starting to feel unreal, like stories he heard about someone else's life. This, the mud and the fear and the constant presence of death, this has become his reality. Sometimes he worries that if he does make it home, he won't be able to adjust back to normal life. How do you go back to worrying about everyday things after you've watched men die? How do you complain about a cold dinner when you've eaten meals in foxholes while artillery shells explode around you? Around 3 in the morning, when the night is darkest and coldest, James hears movement out front. He freezes, instantly alert, finger moving to the trigger guard of his rifle. He listens hard, trying to separate the sound from the general background noise. There it is again, definitely movement, maybe 30 yards out. Could be an animal. There are still deer and wild boar in these woods, somehow surviving despite the war. But it could also be a German patrol, or worse, a raiding party sent to capture prisoners for interrogation. He reaches over and touches Eddie's shoulder, a prearranged signal that means possible contact. Eddie comes awake instantly, years of combat having trained his body to go from sleep to full alertness in seconds. Together they watch and listen, weapons ready. The movement comes again, and now James can see a shape, low to the ground, moving parallel to their lines. He's about to squeeze off a shot when the shape stands up, and in the faint starlight, he sees it's a dog, probably a farm dog gone feral, picking its way through the battlefield looking for food. He eases his finger off the trigger and lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The dog disappears into the darkness, and James and Eddie exchange glances that need no words. How many times have they almost shot at shadows, at their own imagination, at nothing? How many times has nothing almost gotten them killed? The rest of the night passes without incident, and then it's time for the whole cycle to begin again. Dawn approaching, stand to, the cold and the mud and the fear, breakfast if they're lucky, orders for the day, and the endless waiting punctuated by moments of terror. This is the reality of war that the newsreels back home don't show. Not the glorious charges or the dramatic battles, but the grinding, exhausting, terrifying routine of simply existing on the front lines day after day after day. James climbs out of his foxhole as the eastern sky begins to lighten, and he realizes with a start that he's been in France for exactly 6 months as of today. 6 months of this, and according to the rumors, the war might go on for another year or more before Germany is finally defeated. Can he survive another year of this? Can anyone? He looks around at his squad mates, at Eddie lighting his first cigarette of the day, at Jenkins still shaky from yesterday's near-death experience. It's Sergeant Wilson already checking positions and preparing for the day's orders, and he realizes that survival isn't really about any one person. It's about all of them together, watching each other's backs, sharing the load, keeping each other human in the midst of inhumanity. As the sun rises over the French countryside, painting the shattered landscape in shades of gold and amber, James makes himself a promise. He will survive this. He will make it home to Kansas, to his mother and sister, to Sally Henderson, and that dream of a house and a normal life. But he also knows that the man who goes home won't be the same 22-year-old kid who left. War changes you in ways that can't be unchanged. All he can do is try to hold on to enough of himself to still recognize who he is when, if, he finally makes it back to the world beyond this one. Sergeant Wilson's voice cuts through his thoughts. "Mitchell, Kowalski, grab your gear. We're moving up in 20 minutes. Front lines pushing forward, and we're going with them." And just like that, the day truly begins, and Private James Mitchell of the 29th Infantry Division prepares to do it all over again. One more day in a war that seems to have no end, fighting for a victory that feels both inevitable and impossibly distant, trying to stay alive long enough to see it. This is the daily life of a World War II soldier. Not glory or honor or any of the things they promised in the recruitment posters, but simply survival. One day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time.